In this video, I'll be showing my process of building and painting the original character kit, Shaving Bunny, sculpted by Ayumu Hamano. I start by inspecting each part and using nippers and a dental tool to sand off any large tabs. Tabs are excessive material left over from the process of pouring the resin into the molds. I use a dot of liquid masking and I press parts together to line up where I'll drill holes for connections. Using a Dremel, I'll drill 1/8 of an inch holes for magnets and fill them with Cyan-On glue. I put tape over the blade of my X-Acto knife to keep it clean and use it to slide a magnet into one side of each connection. Then I'll tape over those magnets and hold them in place and drop the opposing magnet onto each. This method isn't the fastest, but it makes sure that everything is lined up and the polarities of the magnets are pointing in the right way. And I'm definitely not doing all of this work because I've made that mistake in the past. I use the same method to mark attachment points for pins. I drill the holes, add glue, insert the brass rods, and snip it to length. Now we gotta give this boy a good shake to make sure the connections are secure. All of the large pieces are done in the same way. The process for smaller pieces is almost the same, I just use thinner wire. Here I'm checking the fit for the hand connection. Because it's a little loose, instead of using a single pin in the wrist, I opt to use 2 to prevent it from twisting. Now I'm just doing a quick test assembly to make sure everything goes together nicely. Everything looks good. The next step is using putty to fill in big gaps to make connections less wobbly. The pieces don't fit perfectly right out of the box, so this will help get everything snug. With the dental drill, I carve grooves into the pieces. When the pieces are pressed together, the grooves will create a key way to help prevent the parts from twisting when the kit is assembled. The putty is a 2-part mixture consisting of the putty and a catalyst. Once activated, it dries in about 30 minutes, which gives me enough time to work with it to my satisfaction without slowing down my workflow. Two-part putties also don't shrink when they set, which ensures good fits. I put the putty on the part I want to fill in and cover the opposing part with Vaseline so the putty won't stick to it. I wipe away the excess putty, and what's left is a nice, flush connection. With my electric hand sander and various other small sanding and filing tools, I sand down any seam lines left by the casting process, as well as cleaning up any excess putty left on the pieces. Garage kit parts come in so many shapes and sizes, having an equal number of shapes and sizes of tools makes this a lot easier. A list of the many tools I use can be found on my website, linked in the description. The last step of the prep phase is the process of filling in air bubbles. Air bubbles are a natural part of the resin mixing process, and although there are various methods to try and reduce or eliminate them during casting, most resin model kits will have some amount of bubbles present on the parts. Here I create a mixture of Bondo cream, hardener, and lacquer thinner, which makes it more watery. At this consistency, it's easy to brush on the pieces and it will naturally sink into the holes left by the air bubbles. Then when it's dry, I just sand it down to smooth out the surface. Now that the parts are all ready, it's time to prepare them for painting. First, I soak everything in resin cleaner. Then I strain out the liquid after removing the big pieces to make sure that nothing gets left behind. Resin cleaner removes mold release, which is used to prevent the pieces from sticking to the molds when they are cast. Mold release has to be removed before painting because paint won't stick to the resin properly. Once the resin cleaner evaporates, I put all the pieces on sticks and alligator clips to hold them while airbrushing. Next, I airbrush parts with Surfacer. Surfacer isn't a primer, that comes later. Surfacer dries matte, which makes it easier to spot air bubbles, seam lines, or other imperfections in the resin and helps fill them in. Surfacer is formulated to be sanded, unlike paint, which can flake when sanded. I use different color surfacers depending on the color the final piece will be. Standard surfacer is gray, but that can be difficult for lighter paints to cover. If there are any issues revealed by the surfacer, another round of sanding will take care of it. Now that the surfacing is done, the pieces can be sprayed with primer. Primer is the last step before painting, and it helps the paint adhere to the resin. Any pieces being painted with a skin tone will get a white base coat. Here I'm covering the eyes with liquid masking to keep them white while I spray on the skin tone. For the skin tone, I use what the cool kids call the clear skin method, using pink and orange pigments with a clear lacquer to create a translucent paint that gets darker as I add more layers to it. By adjusting the pink or orange undertones, or even using small amounts of blue, green, or clear brown, you can create a wide variety of skin tones. And spraying additional layers creates a very natural shading look without having to mix more colors. You can even add a diluted clear on top of everything to add a blush tone. I use that here to add a slight flush to his cheeks and ears, and then also for coloring his nipples. Once the skin is done, I add a layer of clear gloss above everything. This locks in the paint underneath, and it lets me paint details on top with enamel paints that can be wiped off or adjusted without damaging the paint job underneath. The client's original request was to try and use real fabric to make the fishnet stockings, but unfortunately, as you'll see, that didn't quite work out in a way that we were happy with. I use masking tape to mask where I'll be painting the seam line on the stocking of each leg, and then I use a clear drying glue to attach mesh material along the line. The idea was I would then cut it off at one side and wrap it around the leg, but the glue wasn't holding and the material wasn't bunching naturally because of the shape of the leg parts. This is also difficult to get the material to fit properly around his feet. The technique tends to work better for figures wearing shoes. I tried a couple of iterations of this, but ultimately we decided to just paint the stockings on instead, so I cleaned any residue off the parts and soaked them in acetone to take everything back to square one. In addition to dissolving the glue and paint, the acetone also stripped the filler we had used earlier, so I had to redo all of that as well. Throughout the painting process, you'll see that I use a lot of white plastic spoons. They're perfect for testing colors and I use them all the time. The plastic has the right kind of surface and finish to show the paint the way it will show on primed resin, as opposed to something like paper, which will absorb some of the paint and come out looking different than how it will look on resin. For painted tights, I start with the skin tone, then use a dark opaque brown to shade the creases, and finish with a clear brown to create the look of the sheer material. With the base color done, I go in with a tiny amount of Mr. Crystal color and purple to give them a nice sheen, and then finally a half matte, half gloss coat to give it that satin finish. This kit has really well defined and sculpted details on the face, so all I had to do was highlight them. Hand painting with lacquer can lift up previous coats of paint, so it's recommended to only use it with an airbrush. Enamel can be hand painted, and because enamel thinner isn't strong enough to break down lacquer, I can easily wipe it off or remove it to refine the painted details without having to strip the whole part. The sculpt quality and detail made this kit really fun to paint. It's also the first masculine kit I've ever done. I've painted a few boys, just not masculine ones. It was a really fun experience doing something different than what I'm used to. Now that the face is done, I seal it all with a clear coat, and now I can move on to the hair. This means I need to mask off the face and beard. For intricate masking work like this, I use a sheet of masking tape that I cut cross-hatch into very tiny squares and triangles. By tiling these onto the piece, I can match sharply angled edges. For curved edges, I just use strips of thin masking tape. Finally, I fill in the gaps with liquid masking to prevent any paint from leaking through. With the face masked off, I can safely spray the hair on his head as well as painting all of the smaller hair pieces. And now I'm going back with more enamels to touch up the hairline and add some color variation, like a touch of gray at the client's request. Now that everything's finished, I mask off the eyes and the lips with liquid masking so that they stay glossy while I spray the rest of the face with a clear matte coat. Here I'm adding a few more hand-painted details. They aren't that detailed in the sculpt, but the client requested them, and they are very important. And here I'm adding color for the fingernails. The details on the hands are nicely sculpted too, so I just paint some dark colored enamel into the creases and wipe off the excess. The bunny suit gets a full coat of yellow and then is shaded with purple. Red is a really weak pigment, so yellow helps brighten it up, and when red is sprayed over purple, it creates a darker red and no new colors need to be mixed for the shading. One of my favorite tools is this circle cutter, which makes it really easy to cut out perfect pieces of tape to mask circular details like buttons. Now that everything is painted and ready to go, it's time for one last assembly to make sure everything looks right. Now we need to add the shaving cream. I tested a few different materials to see what would give the best shaving cream effect. The first attempt was UV resin with some iridescent nail pigment, and me and the client weren't super happy with the look. Next, I ordered a bunch of different snow texture paints for dioramas. One even had some powder for adding extra texture. In the end, we went with the Tamiya Diorama Texture Paint Snow Effect. And then I diluted that with some water to give it a more liquidy look and feel. This part is really scary because unlike with enamels, if I mess this up, this means I have to redo the whole part from scratch. I start with the base layer, marking out the areas that I want to cover with the snow paint, and then I let it dry completely. Once that's set, I add more layers anywhere I want to build up a little bit more volume. I'm really proud of how it turned out, and I'm also incredibly grateful that I didn't have to redo anything. And just like that, he's done. I loved getting a chance to paint this kit, As fun as it is to paint cute girl after cute girl, this was a really fun change of pace, and I love this sculptor. They have such a unique style, and their poses and faces are so expressive. You can really feel the emotion coming off of this kit, and I really hoped I helped to bring it to life here. If you stuck around until the end, thank you so much. I've been streaming painting garage kits for a couple of years now, and this is my first try doing an edited and narrated build like this. This took a lot of work, so if you like this and you want to see more like it, please let me know by liking it, hyping it, or leaving a comment. If there's anything you'd like to see a video focusing on, you can comment that too. If you want to see more of my work, you can check out my links. I stream on YouTube and Twitch. I have a Patreon where I post lots of pictures of kits I work on, including the kinds of kits I can't show on YouTube. And you can always see what I'm posting on Twitter, or X, whatever it's called. You can also check out my website for portfolio pictures, resources, and info about commissioning me. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye. In the end, we went with the Tamiya diorama.